lot of people don't expect musicians or creative folks to have. But honestly, in this day and age, like, we have it. Even if it doesn't seem like we are, because there's no way that we're managing social media and our schedules and all these different hats. And so it's kind of like this unsung quality of creative people. They think, oh yeah, they just go with the flow and they just write a song when they want to. And while that is also true, I think to keep the different ships afloat, just kind of like leaning into that. Now, not to say that like what I was saying, you know, it's important to be creative as well. And I guess setting boundaries with this kind of organization. So prioritizing the creative time for me, right? Which is like, is so important when I am teaching and giving a lot. Like any teacher just gives and gives. And so I quickly learned, though it took some time, how important it was to also just like block out rest or creative time for me. And then that's not just okay, but that's like so important for me to function and be a good educator, be a good songwriter, be a good collaborator in all these other fields. Like I really need to block that out. It's just as important, if not more important than all the other things like meetings and whatnot, you know, just filling up my cup.
No, you're right. It is so important. I literally have to put into my schedule, and this is exactly how it's set in my schedule. Drop everything and eat. You know, go do meditation. Like I literally have to like yell at myself in my calendar to go do things personally, because I put all these meetings in my calendar. I plan out my whole business day. Like, why am I not carving out and mapping out time for my personal self? One, just to eat food, but two, like you're saying, to actually take time to refill your cup. Metaphorically, not just physically, like I was just saying. But no, I think that's really important that you do that. And you're right. I think especially now creatives have to wear so many different hats. So yes, we are very organizational in our way of doing things, but you can still create boundaries and create that kind of structure without losing the ability to be free flowing and creative. You're just marking out, like you were just saying, maybe blocks of time. And within that time, you may, you know, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but yeah, you may use it to go out and be amongst friends or nature or listening to music or sitting in silence, whatever it is that allows you to feel yourself, I would assume is what you do within that time.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been trying to, it's tricky because it depends on the headspace. Like if I'm in such a good workflow with maybe any other facet of my life, you know, I'll want to keep going. Or when I do have time to myself blocked out to just rest or do what I need to do, I'll still be thinking that I could spend that time in another way a little more wisely. And so just kind of like reeling that back in, where it's like just that like mental struggle too of like reminding myself like the balance and the boundaries. And like even if this time is blocked off to be creative or to sit down at the piano, play guitar, and I don't write a song, like there doesn't always need to be an output per se, but just like the sheer act of like the habitual ritual of it all. Like, because I think that long term is going to be more sustainable and have good fruits, you know, eventually. But just remembering in a world where a lot of the time it's like, okay, what am I getting out of this now? Like, it's a slow burn, I think. And so that's one tricky thing with all of it. But I'm sure any creative must go through the same thing.
Oh yeah. And yeah, I'm more of a creative on the side of writing and like the talk audio space, whereas obviously you're more the music space. And yeah, a lot of the same things that you just said, I have to try to give myself those boundaries. And also what you were saying reminds me of, and we'll get back to talking about the studio shortly, but as an actual musician, as a singer songwriter, you know, how, you know, we come across these blocks sometimes where we're just not feeling the inspiration, or, you know, for whatever reason, we're not able to create a song or to do what it is that we love to do creatively. And, you know, all of us have the different things that can maybe help to spur that. But for you, like, how do you kind of get through those mental blocks? I know I have them sometimes. And one of the things that you had just said, which I really liked, was that you're not giving yourself expectations. Like, yes, there might be certain times you have to hit a deadline, but for those creative blocks that you had, you weren't coming with the expectation that you have to create a whole song or even create anything. And you're just going to use that, you know, use that space. And so taking away that expectation may be helpful, but are there other ways that you use to be able to help to get through certain kind of mental blocks when it comes comes to your creativity?
Yeah. Honestly, I immediately thought of like how I do document everything, even if I think it's terrible and I'm not really feeling it, right? Like in my mind, I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel like it's going to come to anything. I still record what I do and I put it down, and I have like a huge collection, just voice memos, or I'll put them in like a DAW, but tiny little fragments. And this is kind of what I was hinting at earlier about how sometimes a lot of great things, they're not overnight successes. There are at times, but it's just that like daily practice and ritual and showing up. And so to kind of help break through any blocks, I have a long library of tiny little tidbits of moments of creativity of different points throughout my life that I can go back to. Are some of them still bad? Yes. But are some of them actually good the next time I listen to them? Like, oh. And it's just this like web of creativity that is not linear. And the more you can accept that and lean into it, I think the more successful you can be and the more kind you can be to yourself, and just like not being afraid. I think we're always afraid and we're instantly judging ourselves, especially in a creative space. So just write it down. It doesn't need to be anything that's shared, but that helps me. And I can come back to a lot of these little creative fragments, try and make something of it or reinvent it. And that helps me tremendously.
I like that. And, just, I don't know why it is, but lately listening to music, I've had this thought of, I really truly love music a lot because of that emotional connection that it brings. And a lot of times a song can really bring you to a past moment in your life, or maybe it's just helping you in this current moment that you're feeling really sad or upset, or maybe you're really happy. It taps into all different kinds of emotion. But I've really been thinking lately about the writers themselves and like, okay, they're the ones tapping into this emotion. Are they tapping into it safely? Like, again, some of these things are based in trauma. And so how do you tap into that emotional state while keeping yourself safe through that?
Wow, I don't think anyone's ever asked me a question like this. I appreciate the thoughtfulness behind it. But honestly, time helps, right? Like protecting yourself in order to be this channel. I've always thought of songwriting as just being a channel and a conduit. And I don't know if you've read the book Big Magic by... oh goodness, I don't want to mess up the author's name, but it's a book about creativity, Elizabeth Gilbert. It's a book about creativity, and one of the ideas that stuck to me was how ideas and inspiration, we all have access to it if we're open enough to be this vessel to kind of like pluck it out. It's just floating in the ether. And if we are vulnerable and open enough to receiving that inspiration, we can be the channel that brings it into this realm, right? And so in terms of trauma and protecting yourself as a songwriter, I think there has to be like a processing and just time. Like, you're not protecting yourself if you're going to sit down to write and it's just too raw and it's going to genuinely trigger you. And obviously the case is different for other emotions, right? Like being in love and that kind of bubbly feeling, like you want to sit down and get that in now, right? So there's that balance as well of different emotions. But in terms of protecting yourself, and if it's a delicate heartbreak, grief, right? And you just need time to work through it. I know journaling helps me personally to just process. And a lot of that will happen. And there have been times where I've gone back to old journal entries and then I use journal entries as a jumping off point for lyrics. But I'm a little more separated from it and I can approach it from a place that won't actually, trigger me as much or be as painful to write through. But every songwriter is different and it just kind of depends. I think a lot of great songs have also just been written in that sheer, raw, unfiltered moment. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate all that, and you're right. I think, yeah, depending on the emotion and depending on yourself, you know, and in your situation, you can decide how you want to tap into that. But I think I like that, those healthy boundaries of, yeah, maybe you write it down and then leave it to come back to when you're feeling a little bit safer to re-engage those emotions.
Exactly.